The whisper sliced through the sterile air of the Ashford Enterprises lobby like a blade through silk. Afternoon light spilled through the glass facade, catching on polished marble floors that reflected a world built on order and precision. The receptionist leaned toward her colleague, voice barely audible above the hum of the ventilation system. "Who's that man?" "Just the janitor." "But why is the girl talking to him?" 50 floors above, Victoria Ashford stood frozen before a wall of security monitors, her fingers white against the edge of her standing desk. The coffee in her hand had gone cold an hour ago. On screen 4, her daughter knelt on the marble floor, knees folded beneath a silk dress that cost more than most people earned in a month. The child's face tilted upward toward a man in faded blue coveralls, his dark skin glistening with the kind of honest sweat that came from work, not exercise. Victoria's breath caught as she watched Sophie's lips move. The audio feed crackled to life, and a sound emerged that Victoria hadn't heard in 96 days, not since her husband died on May 28th. "Thank you." The words were barely a whisper, fragile as spider silk, but they detonated in Victoria's chest like a grenade. Her hand shot out, slamming the intercom button hard enough to bruise. "Who authorized that man to approach my daughter?" The control room fell silent. A technician stammered something about the janitor not touching anyone, just sitting there, but Victoria wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes locked on the screen, where Marcus Cole remained perfectly still, his head lowered, as if afraid to shatter the moment with movement. Between them sat a small teddy bear, hand-stitched from fabric that looked like it had been repurposed from a child's old shirt. The stitching was careful, deliberate, the work of someone who understood that broken things could be mended if you had patience and didn't mind the scars showing. Sophie's small hand closed around the bear, trembling fingers testing its weight. The girl's mouth moved again, forming words Victoria had begged 9 specialists to coax from her daughter's throat. Words that had died the moment Thomas's car crumpled against the highway barrier, taking with it not just a husband and father, but Sophie's voice itself. "Get security. Get that man out of the building, now." "But ma'am, he works here. 3 years, no complaints. No, I don't care if he's worked here since the building was poured. My daughter doesn't speak to strangers." The irony of that sentence hit Victoria the moment it left her mouth. Sophie didn't speak to anyone, not to therapists with credentials from Harvard and Johns Hopkins, not to the grief counselor who came twice a week, not even to Victoria herself, who had spent 3 months reading bedtime stories to silence, waiting for a response that never came. Yet here was her daughter whispering to a man with a mop. Victoria rewound the footage, watching it again from the beginning. Marcus had been cleaning near the elevators when Sophie wandered away from Garrett Sullivan, the bodyguard Victoria hired after Thomas died. Garrett had been distracted by a phone call just for a moment, but that was all it took. Sophie had drifted toward the janitor like a moth to flame, drawn by something Victoria couldn't see on the security feed. Marcus noticed her approach, but didn't acknowledge it. He simply placed the teddy bear on the floor between them, maintaining a careful distance of several feet. Then he sat cross-legged on marble that cost $2,000 per square foot and waited. No words, no gestures, just presence. Sophie had circled the bear 3 times before sitting down to examine it. Marcus still hadn't moved. The whole interaction lasted 7 minutes and 43 seconds. Victoria watched every frame, searching for manipulation, for threat, for anything that explained why this stranger succeeded where every expert had failed. She found nothing except patience so profound it looked like prayer. The next morning arrived heavy with the weight of decisions Victoria didn't want to make. She paced her office, unable to settle into the executive chair that had witnessed countless strategic victories. Manhattan woke beneath a sky the color of old bruises, visible through windows she'd barely noticed in months of grief-fueled automation. Her reflection haunted the glass, sharp and bloodless. 40-years-old widow for 4 months, running a company her husband helped build from a single floor in a dream. She had commandeered empires and crushed competitors, but she couldn't command her own daughter to speak. Until yesterday. The intercom buzzed. Marcus Cole had arrived as requested. Victoria positioned herself behind her desk when he entered, using furniture as barrier and authority. Let him stand, let him wonder. She had learned long ago that silence was a weapon, and she wielded it with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Marcus stood near the door, holding his cap in calloused hands that looked like they knew hard work intimately. His uniform was faded but spotless, pressed with the kind of care that spoke to pride, even in circumstances that offered little reason for it. "You did something 9 specialists couldn't." Her voice came out colder than she intended, but she didn't soften it. Control was all she had left. "I didn't do anything special, ma'am. Just sat with her until she felt safe enough to talk." The words landed differently than Victoria expected. No defensiveness, no pride, Just simple fact delivered in a voice that carried the weight of someone who had learned hard lessons and survived them. My daughter hasn't spoken since her father died. Do you understand what that means? Means she's hurting in ways words can't reach yet. Victoria moved from behind the desk, circling closer, studying him the way she studied quarterly reports for hidden weaknesses. I've reviewed your file. Former elementary school teacher. Left the profession 5 years ago after a personal tragedy. Divorced amicable. 3 years with Ashford Enterprises, night shift maintenance. Clean record. She paused, watching for reaction. Juvenile record sealed. Assault charges, age 16, dropped after circumstances were reviewed. Marcus's jaw tightened, the first crack in his composure. I defended my mother from her boyfriend. Court agreed it was justified. Record was sealed for a reason. I'm aware. I'm also aware you were investigated at your previous school. Parent accused you of inappropriate behavior with a student. Completely cleared. Parent admitted the accusation was false, motivated by other factors. The pause before other factors spoke volumes neither of them needed to articulate. Victoria had read the full report. The parent had explicitly referenced Marcus's race in the complaint. The investigation cleared him within a week, but the stain remained on his record, visible to anyone who looked hard enough. Why did you stop teaching? Marcus's hands tightened on his cap. For the first time, his gaze shifted away from hers, landing somewhere beyond her shoulder. Lost someone. After that, classrooms felt too loud. The simplicity of it cut deeper than elaborate explanation would have. Victoria recognized the shape of that grief, the way it carved out spaces inside you that never quite filled again. My daughter is 6 years old. She witnessed her father die in a car accident. The trauma therapist says she has selective mutism triggered by the event. She won't speak to me, won't speak to anyone. Then yesterday you sit on a floor with a stuffed animal and she says thank you. Victoria stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines around Marcus's eyes, the silver threading through his close-cropped hair. I need to know you can do it again. I'll pay whatever it takes. Marcus's expression shifted into something that might have been pity or understanding or both. Not everything can be purchased, ma'am. The sentence hung between them like smoke. Victoria felt her spine straighten, the old instinct to crush insubordination rising hot in her throat. But before she could speak, Marcus continued, his voice quiet but firm. You should learn to be silent long enough to see someone. That's what your daughter needs. Not another person trying to fix her, but someone willing to sit in the broken places with her until she's ready to stand up. The words hit Victoria like a slap. Her carefully constructed control wavered, and for a heartbeat, she was just a mother who had failed to reach her own child, standing before a janitor who had somehow succeeded. That will be all, Mr. Cole. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. Marcus nodded, replaced his cap, and turned toward the door. Just before he left, he spoke without looking back. For what it's worth, ma'am, she's not broken. Just scared. And scared things need quiet, not noise. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded deafening in the silence he left behind. Victoria stood motionless for a full minute after he left, her pulse hammering in her ears. When had her world become so small that a janitor could see things she couldn't? When had she stopped being the kind of person who noticed the people who kept her empire running? She pulled up Marcus's file again, reading between the lines this time. Elementary education degree from a state school, not prestigious but respectable. Teaching certificate earned while working full-time. Glowing recommendations from principals who called him a natural with difficult children. Then nothing for 5 years except a series of jobs that seemed designed to avoid people rather than engage them. Night security, warehouse inventory, finally custodial work at Ashford Enterprises, the kind of position invisible to everyone except the floors he cleaned. The notation about his son appeared in a background check addendum. Daniel Cole, deceased 5 years prior, age 8. Cause of death, drowning. No further details. Victoria closed the file, her throat tight. She understood now why Marcus recognized Sophie's pain. He carried his own heavy enough that even 5 years couldn't lighten the load. By Wednesday afternoon, Victoria had made her decision despite every instinct screaming caution. She would allow Marcus supervised access to Sophie for 1 week. If her daughter continued to respond, they would reassess. If not, the experiment ended. Garrett Sullivan stood 10 feet away when Marcus arrived at 4 o'clock, positioned with the kind of alert stillness that came from military training. The bodyguard's hand rested near his concealed weapon, ready for trouble he clearly expected from a man whose only crime was patience. Marcus paid him no attention. He settled onto the marble floor with a small canvas bag, pulling out 3 sheets of colorful paper. His movements were unhurried, almost meditative, as he began folding the first sheet into precise creases. Sophie appeared from behind a pillar where she'd been hiding watching. She approached, slowly clutching the teddy bear from yesterday against her chest. Victoria observed from the executive cafeteria on the fifth floor, a space she rarely visited, watching through the glass walls that gave her a clear view down to the lobby below. The security feed on her phone provided audio, but she found herself relying more on what she could see directly. Marcus didn't look at Sophie, didn't acknowledge her presence with words or gestures. He simply folded paper with the concentrated focus of someone creating sacred geometry, transforming a flat sheet into three-dimensional form through patience and precision. Sophie sat down cross-legged, still clutching the bear. She watched Marcus's hands work for several minutes before reaching out tentatively. Marcus paused, glanced at her briefly, then moved the half-folded crane closer to her. Sophie picked it up, examining the creases, trying to understand how flat became dimensional. Like this. Her voice emerged, small and uncertain, but it emerged. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, pressing hard against the sob that wanted to escape. Garrett shifted his weight, clearly as surprised as Victoria felt. Marcus nodded once, his hands guiding Sophie's smaller fingers to the correct fold without actually touching her. The girl concentrated fiercely, her tongue poking out between her teeth, the way it used to when Thomas helped her with puzzles. The memory stabbed Victoria with unexpected sharpness. For 20 minutes they sat in silence, broken only by Sophie's occasional questions, each one a small miracle. Marcus answered with gestures, more than words, showing, rather than telling, allowing Sophie to discover, rather than instructing her directly. When the session ended, Sophie carefully placed her incomplete crane next to Marcus's finished one, as if marking her progress. She stood, hugged her teddy bear, and walked back toward Garrett without prompting. But at the last moment, she turned back. Tomorrow, Marcus smiled just slightly. If your mother says it's okay. Sophie looked up at the ceiling as if she could see through 50 floors of steel and concrete to where Victoria watched. Then she nodded and left with Garrett, leaving Marcus alone to gather his papers and resume his cleaning duties. Victoria sat down heavily in a cafeteria chair, her hands shaking. 3 months of specialists and thousands of dollars in therapy hadn't accomplished what 20 minutes of origami achieved. She didn't understand it, didn't trust it, but she couldn't deny it either. That night, she drove Sophie home herself instead of letting the driver handle it. The car filled with silence, but it felt different somehow. Less suffocating, almost companionable. Mommy Victoria's hands jerked on the wheel. She glanced in the rearview mirror where Sophie sat in her booster seat, clutching the teddy bear. Yes, sweetheart, why don't you talk like Mr. Marcus? The question caught Victoria off guard. She navigated through traffic, buying time to formulate an answer. What do you mean he doesn't fill up all the air? He leaves room. The observation pierced something in Victoria's chest. When had her daughter become so perceptive? Or had she always been this way, and Victoria simply never noticed because she was too busy filling up all the air herself? I'll try to do better, baby. Sophie didn't respond, but Victoria caught her small nod in the mirror before the girl returned her attention to the bear, whispering secrets Victoria couldn't hear. Marcus Cole lived in Queens in a fourth-floor walk-up that smelled like other people's cooking and old radiator heat. The apartment was small and relentlessly tidy, everything in its place with the precision of someone who found order comforting in a disorderly world. A photograph held pride of place on the nightstand, a boy with Marcus's smile and his mother's eyes frozen forever at age 8. Daniel. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, running a thumb over the cracked glass of the frame. 5 years hadn't dulled the edges of that loss. Some grief didn't heal so much as it settled, becoming part of your bones, changing the way you move through the world. You'd like her, kid. His voice emerged rough in the empty apartment. He'd gotten used to talking to Daniel in the quiet spaces between sleep and waking, in moments when the weight of absence pressed too heavy to carry alone. Sophie, she's scared, but she's brave, like you were. The comparison felt right. Daniel had been terrified of water after nearly drowning at age 3, but he'd made himself learn to swim anyway, determined not to let fear win. 5 years later, that determination killed him when he dove into a retention pond after another child pushing the smaller kid to safety before the current dragged him under. The police called it a tragedy. Marcus called it typical Daniel, too brave for his own good, too willing to risk himself for others. His son had died the way he'd lived, trying to save someone. Marcus set the photo down carefully and moved to his sewing corner, pulling out fabric and thread. Working with his hands helped quiet the noise in his head. Tonight he started another bear, cutting pieces from one of Daniel's old t-shirts, the blue one with the dinosaur that had been his favorite. 5 years of bears, each one stitched, with the kind of patience learned from grief, each one given away to someone who needed it more than Marcus needed to keep holding on. He thought about Victoria Ashford, sharp and brittle, as winter ice wrapped so tight in control she'd forgotten how to breathe. He recognized her type. People who thought if they just worked hard enough, cared enough, controlled enough, they could prevent the inevitable pain life delivered, whether you were ready or not. The truth Marcus had learned the hard way was simpler and harder. You couldn't control grief. You could only survive it. And surviving meant learning to sit still in the wreckage, accepting the broken pieces instead of frantically trying to reassemble them into something that looked whole. Sophie understood that instinctively. She'd stopped trying to be okay because being okay was impossible when your world ended in twisted metal and your father's blood. She'd retreated into silence because silence was honest in ways words couldn't be. Victoria hadn't learned that lesson yet, but Marcus thought maybe she was starting to. The weeks bled into each other, September's giving way to early October, with the kind of relentless forward motion that marked time whether you were ready or not. Sophie's sessions with Marcus became routine, supervised by Garrett Sullivan, who gradually relaxed his posture from threat-ready to merely alert. The girl's vocabulary expanded daily, first in whispers, then in tentative full voice, finally in the kind of breathless enthusiasm six-year-olds specialized in. Victoria found herself manufacturing reasons to be on lower floors during Sophie's sessions, never quite admitting she was checking on them, always maintaining the fiction of coincidence. She watched her daughter laugh for the first time since Thomas died, the sound bubbling up when Marcus accidentally folded his crane backwards and had to start over. The laughter hurt more than the silence had somehow because it proved Sophie could still feel joy, which meant she chose silence specifically with Victoria. That realization drove Victoria to Linda Marsh's office on a Thursday afternoon, HR Director Marsh's domain of employee files and workplace protocols. The older woman looked up from her computer with the expression of someone already calculating risk. I want to offer Marcus Cole a formal position. Community liaison working with employees and their families. Linda's fingers stilled on her keyboard. Victoria, he's a custodian with a GED and a teaching certificate from a state school. The board will ask questions. Let them ask. He also has a sealed juvenile record that won't stay sealed if we promote him to a visible role. Someone will leak it. Someone always does. Victoria had considered that. She'd spent 3 weeks considering every angle, every risk, every potential disaster that could come from elevating a night janitor to a position that put him in contact with vulnerable families. The calculus kept coming back to one fact: Marcus had given her daughter's voice back when no one else could. I'm aware of the risks. I'm also aware that he's more qualified than people with fancy credentials who've never actually helped anyone. Linda leaned back in her chair, studying Victoria with the kind of assessing gaze that came from 20 years of reading people. This isn't about qualifications, is it? This is about Sophie. Victoria didn't flinch. Everything is about Sophie. She's all I have left. The admission hung in the air between them, more vulnerable than Victoria intended. Linda's expression softened marginally. I'll draft the paperwork. But Victoria, be prepared. People will talk. They'll question your judgment. Some will question your relationship with him. My relationship with Marcus Cole is professional. He helps my daughter. End of story. That's your story. Not everyone will buy it. Then they can take it up with me directly. Victoria left Linda's office with her spine straight and her jaw set, already anticipating the battles ahead. She'd built Ashford Enterprises into a multinational powerhouse by refusing to back down when challenged. She wouldn't start now just because the challenge involved gossip instead of quarterly reports. The whispers started before Marcus even knew about the promotion offer. The cafeteria buzzed with speculation about the CEO spending time on lower floors. The receptionist who'd first noticed Sophie talking to Marcus mentioned it to a friend, who mentioned it to another friend, until the story spread like oil across water, picking up embellishments with each retelling. Did you hear Victoria Ashford's daughter only talks to the janitor? I heard she fired all the therapists and hired him instead. Must be paying him a fortune. Why else would a guy like that stick around? The undertone remained unspoken but present in every conversation, the subtle implication that there must be something unusual, something questionable about a white billionaire CEO allowing a black custodian access to her daughter. No one said it directly, but the racism lived in the pauses and the raised eyebrows, in the way conversation stopped when Marcus entered a room. Marcus heard it all. He'd spent 38 years navigating the particular kind of scrutiny that came with existing while black, in spaces that expected him to be invisible or threatening, but never simply human. The whispers didn't surprise him. They just confirmed what he'd always known: kindness from people who look like him was always suspect, always questioned, always assumed to have ulterior motives. He considered withdrawing, telling Victoria the experiment had run its course, returning to night shifts when fewer people were around to watch and wonder and whisper. But then he thought about Sophie's face when she finally got her crane to hold its shape, the pure triumph in her eyes, when she showed it to him like it was a trophy instead of folded paper. Some things mattered more than comfort. On a Wednesday afternoon, Victoria pulled Marcus aside after his session with Sophie. They stood in a quiet corner near the executive elevators, far from the lobby's foot traffic. Victoria looked tired. Marcus thought the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep and couldn't be fixed with sleep. "I want to offer you a position: Community Outreach Coordinator. You'd work with employee families, develop support programs, help people navigate difficult times." Marcus studied her carefully, looking for the angle. "That's not a real position." "It is. If I create it, you'll be criticized. The board will ask questions." Victoria's expression hardened into something Marcus recognized from their first meeting, the steel underneath the polish. "Let them. You're qualified by results, and that's the only metric I care about. People will talk. They already are. I'm aware. You know what they'll say. You know what they'll assume." The pause stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. "I know." Marcus considered the offer, weighing his own discomfort against the opportunity to do work that mattered. He thought about Daniel, who'd never hesitated when someone needed help, never calculated the personal cost of doing the right thing. "All right, but I keep cleaning floors 1 day a week. Reminds me where I started." Victoria's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but might become one eventually. "Deal." They shook on it, her hand small and cool in his calloused grip, sealing an arrangement that would change both their lives in ways neither could predict. The photograph appeared on social media 3 days later, posted by Garrett Sullivan's cousin, who worked building security. It showed Marcus and Sophie on the lobby floor, surrounded by paper cranes in various stages of completion. Sophie's face glowed with concentration, her small hands trying to mirror Marcus's precise folds. The image captured something genuine, something pure, the kind of moment that social media was built to share. By morning, it had gone viral locally. The caption read, "Beautiful moment at work today. Sometimes kindness comes from unexpected places." Comments poured in, overwhelmingly positive at first. People loved the image, loved the story of the janitor who helped the grieving child when expensive therapists couldn't. They shared it with hearts and crying emojis, declaring their faith in humanity restored. Then the second wave hit. Questions emerged about appropriateness, about a grown man spending unsupervised time with a young girl, about a black employee and a white child, the optics, the implications. The ugliness lived in the subtext in carefully coded language about safety and boundaries, and whether this was really appropriate for a workplace environment. By noon, the tabloids had picked it up. Billionaire CEO's daughter bonds. With janitor compassion or concern, the article included speculation about Victoria's judgment, about whether grief had clouded her ability to protect her daughter, about the unusual relationship between employer and employee. They dug up Marcus's background, the sealed juvenile record that wasn't quite sealed enough, the false accusation from 6 years ago that had been completely debunked, but still looked damning when presented without context. Preston Hayes called an emergency board meeting. Victoria sat at the head of the conference table in the 40th floor boardroom, watching Preston pace near the windows with the barely contained energy of a predator circling prey. He'd been waiting for this, she realized. Not this specifically, but any opening to question her leadership, any crack in the armor that would let him pry his way into the position he'd been denied when the board chose Victoria over him 5 years ago. "This is a PR disaster." Preston's voice carried the weight of someone who believed he was being reasonable, not recognizing the knife hidden in his concern. "My daughter spoke for the first time in 3 months. That's not a disaster. That's a miracle. One you're exploiting for optics." The accusation landed like a hammer blow. Victoria felt rage flash hot in her chest, but she kept her voice level, professional. "I'm not exploiting anything. I'm allowing my daughter to heal in the way that works for her. By giving a janitor with a criminal record unsupervised access to her, his record was sealed for a reason. He was 16 defending his mother. The charges were dropped, and the investigation at his previous school also cleared. Completely. The accusing parent admitted to making false claims motivated by prejudice." Preston stopped pacing, turning to face her directly. "That's your narrative. The media will write their own, then we'll correct them. You can't correct perception, Victoria." And right now, the perception is that you're either incredibly naive or incredibly reckless with your daughter's safety. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. No one met Victoria's eyes. What do you suggest Preston distance the company from this situation? Put the employee on paid leave pending a thorough review. Make a statement that reinforces our commitment to appropriate boundaries. Fire him, you mean? I didn't say fire. You didn't have to. Victoria stood her hands flat on the table's polished surface. Marcus Cole has done nothing wrong except show my daughter kindness when she needed it most. If this board thinks I'm going to throw him away for optics, you've seriously misjudged who I am. The room fell silent. Preston's jaw tightened. Then perhaps we've misjudged who should be leading this company. The threat hung in the air, naked and undeniable. Victoria met his gaze without flinching. Is that a challenge, Preston? It's a concern. Several of us share it. Then let's vote on it, right now. No confidence in my leadership on the record. The other board members exchanged glances. No one wanted to be the first to raise their hand. We'll table this for now. Preston's retreat was tactical, not genuine. Victoria recognized the calculation in his eyes. But Victoria, this isn't going away. You need to think very carefully about what you're willing to sacrifice for this man. After they filed out, Victoria remained in the boardroom alone, pacing between the table and windows. The cityscape sprawled 40 floors below, but she barely registered it. Her phone buzzed against the polished wood. A text from an unknown number. You should check your daughter's school portal. There's been an incident. Victoria's hands shook as she pulled up the portal. A note from Sophie's teacher marked urgent timestamp 20 minutes ago. Sophie had a meltdown today when another student asked about the janitor man. She became very upset and refused to talk about it. I tried to comfort her, but she shut down completely. Please call me at your earliest convenience. The carefully constructed world Victoria had been protecting shattered like glass. The whispers had reached Sophie. Her daughter, who just started speaking again, had been confronted with the ugliness adults created around something beautiful. Victoria grabbed her coat and ran for the elevator protocol in meetings forgotten. Sophie needed her, and for once, Victoria knew exactly what that meant. She needed to be silent long enough to see her daughter's pain, and then she needed to fight like hell to protect her from it. The battle lines were drawn. The scandal was just beginning. And somewhere in Queens, Marcus Cole was about to get a call that would force him to choose between his own peace and someone else's salvation. Again. The call came at 2 in the morning, jolting Marcus from restless sleep, where Daniel's face always waited in the dark. He fumbled for his phone, squinting at the unfamiliar number glowing harsh against his nightstand. Mr. Cole, this is Eleanor Brennan from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about Sophie Ashford. Marcus sat up, heart hammering against his ribs. Through his apartment window, Queens slept under sodium streetlights, indifferent to the way a life could pivot on a single phone call. I'm listening. We received a complaint. Anonymous, alleging inappropriate contact between you and the child. I'm required to investigate. The words landed like blows, each one calculated to bruise. Marcus had known this moment would come eventually. It always did. The color of his skin guaranteed suspicion, and kindness only made it worse. When tomorrow, 9 a.m. at our offices. Bring documentation of your interactions with Sophie, any witnesses who can verify your conduct, and your full employment history. Agent Brennan's voice carried professional neutrality, but Marcus heard what lived beneath it. She'd already made assumptions. The investigation was formality, not discovery. I'll be there. He hung up and sat in darkness. Daniel's photograph watching him from across the room. 5 years since his son drowned, saving another child, and Marcus still couldn't decide if that sacrifice was heroic or just another way the world punished people for caring too much. His phone lit up again. Victoria Ashford this time. I just got the same call. Marcus, I'm so sorry. Not your fault. Yes, it is. The board leaked something. Preston Hayes, probably. He's been looking for ammunition since the viral photo. Marcus rubbed his eyes, exhaustion settling into his bones like sediment. They'll dig up everything. The assault charge when I was 16. The false accusation at my old school. It'll all look worse than it was. I know. I've already called my lawyers. Don't. Her silence stretched across the phone line, surprised and uncertain. If you lawyer up, it looks like we're hiding something. Let me handle this myself. I've got nothing to hide except a past that looks bad without context. Marcus, they'll crucify you. Maybe. But if you defend me too hard, they'll crucify Sophie instead. Say you're not protecting your daughter, that grief has made you reckless. I won't let that happen. Victoria's breath caught, raw and ragged. I can't just abandon you. You're not. You're protecting your daughter. That's the job. He ended the call before she could argue, then spent the rest of the night preparing for an interrogation he'd endured in various forms his entire life. Eleanor Brennan's office occupied a gray building in Lower Manhattan, the kind of bureaucratic space designed to strip away pretense and leave only raw truth exposed. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a folder thick with documentation he'd compiled through the sleepless hours. Every interaction with Sophie logged and time-stamped. Garrett Sullivan's witness statements. Victoria's written authorization for supervised sessions. Agent Brennan was younger than he expected, maybe 35, with the sharp eyes of someone trained to spot deception. She gestured him into a conference room where another caseworker sat ready with recording equipment. Mr. Cole, thank you for coming. This is Officer Patricia Wells, my colleague. We'll be recording this conversation. Marcus nodded, settling into the cheap plastic chair that squeaked under his weight. I understand you've been working with Sophie Ashford, daughter of Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Enterprises. Not working with her, just spending supervised time, helping her feel safe enough to talk again. And how did this arrangement begin? Sophie approached me while I was cleaning the lobby. I placed a stuffed animal nearby, maintained distance. She spoke to me. First time she'd spoken in months. Brennan's pen scratched across her notepad. Why do you think she spoke to you specifically? Marcus considered the question carefully. I lost my son 5 years ago. Grief teaches you how to sit with pain without trying to fix it. Sophie recognized that, maybe. Kids know who's safe. Tell me about your son. The pivot caught him off guard, but Marcus understood the tactic. Establish emotional landscape, look for inconsistencies, find the pressure points that made people reveal truths they'd rather hide. Daniel, 8 years old when he died, drowned trying to save another kid who fell in a retention pond. Pushed the other child to safety first. Patricia Wells looked it up from her notes, something shifting in her expression. Your son died a hero. My son died because the world taught him to be brave when being scared would have kept him alive. The bitterness surprised even Marcus. He'd kept that particular grief locked down tight, but something about this sterile room, these strangers judging his capacity for harm, cracked open the container. Brennan pressed forward. And after his death, you left teaching. Well, I couldn't be around children anymore. Everything reminded me of what I'd lost. Yet you chose to help Sophie Ashford. I didn't choose it. She found me. The interrogation continued for 2 hours, circling back to the same questions from different angles, searching for contradictions in his story. They asked about the sealed juvenile record, making Marcus relive the night he was 16 and his mother's boyfriend came home drunk and violent. He defended her with a kitchen chair, in his own fury breaking the man's arm in 3 places. Self-defense, the court ruled, but the arrest remained on his record like a scar that never quite healed. Then came the accusation from 6 years ago, the parent who'd claimed Marcus touched her son inappropriately during after-school tutoring. The investigation cleared him within a week, the parent eventually admitting she'd lied because she didn't want a black man alone with her child. The school board apologized. The parent faced no consequences. Marcus quit teaching 3 months later. Did you ever feel angry about the false accusation? Every day, Brennan leaned forward, angry enough to want revenge, to prove something. Marcus met her gaze directly. Angry enough to learn that some people will always see threat before they see humanity. Angry enough to stop trying to prove I'm safe and just accept that I'll never be safe enough for people determined to be afraid. The honesty seemed to unsettle her. She glanced at Patricia Wells, some unspoken communication passing between them. We'll need to interview Sophie as well, with a child psychologist present. Marcus nodded, knowing what came next would be worse. They'd ask Sophie questions designed to trap her in contradictions, to excavate trauma, while searching for evidence of harm. The process would hurt her, even if it ultimately cleared him. One more thing, Mr. Cole. Why do you think someone would file a complaint against you? Because kindness from people who look like me is always suspicious. Because a black man helping a white child makes people uncomfortable in ways they don't want to examine. Because it's easier to assume the worst than to believe someone might just be trying to help. Brennan closed her folder. We'll be in touch. Meanwhile, you're restricted from any contact with Sophie Ashford until this investigation concludes. Marcus stood his chair, scraping harsh against linoleum. How long weeks? Maybe longer. He left the building into November cold that bit through his jacket, the city indifferent to another life, suspended in bureaucratic limbo. His phone buzzed immediately. Victoria. How bad? They're interviewing Sophie next. Her sharp intake of breath crackled across the connection. I'll prepare her. Don't. Just let her tell the truth. That's all we've got. The media explosion happened faster than Victoria anticipated. By Wednesday morning, Marcus's juvenile record had leaked to every tabloid in the city, context stripped away to leave only the inflammatory headline. CEO's mentor has violent criminal past. The article detailed his assault arrest without mentioning self-defense, highlighted the false accusation without noting it was completely debunked, and painted a picture of a dangerous man given access to a vulnerable child by a CEO, too grief-stricken to protect her own daughter. Victoria's inbox flooded with messages from board members, investors, clients demanding explanations. Her PR firm called every 15 minutes with new crisis management strategies, each one requiring her to distance herself from Marcus to save the company's reputation. She ignored them all. Preston Hayes appeared in her office doorway at noon, his expression arranged into concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We need to talk about damage control. There's nothing to control. Marcus has done nothing wrong." Preston closed the door behind him, lowering his voice to the tone of someone sharing uncomfortable truth. "That's not what the investigation will show. They'll find something even if it's just optics. And when they do this, a company will burn along with your judgment. Then it burns. Victoria, be reasonable. Your daughter aside, you have responsibilities to shareholders, to employees. Thousands of people depend on this company for their livelihoods. And one little girl depends on me to protect the person who helped her heal. That's the responsibility that matters." Preston's jaw tightened, his careful mask slipping. "You're making this personal when it should be strategic. It's always been personal, Preston. You just can't see past quarterly reports long enough to recognize that people aren't assets to be managed." He studied her for a long moment, something hard and wounded flickering behind his polished exterior. "My daughter was assaulted by her college professor 3 years ago. He groomed her, manipulated her, destroyed her trust in ways she's still recovering from. The school protected him because he brought in research grants. They sacrificed her safety for institutional reputation." The revelation hit Victoria like cold water, reframing every interaction she'd had with Preston since the scandal broke. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. No one does. She asked me to keep it quiet, didn't want the stigma. But I see the patterns, Victoria. A powerful adult, a vulnerable child. Everyone around them wanting to believe the best because believing the worst is uncomfortable. Marcus isn't that man. That's what they all say. That's what the school has said about her professor until they couldn't deny it anymore." Victoria's throat tightened with frustration and unwanted sympathy. "I understand why you're afraid, but fear isn't evidence. Marcus has been investigated and cleared. Sophie trusts him. That should count for something. Trust is what predators exploit, or it's what healing requires. You're punishing Marcus for crimes he didn't commit because you couldn't punish the man who hurt your daughter." Preston's face went white, then red. He stood abruptly. "This conversation is over, but Victoria, know this. I will do everything in my power to protect this company from your blind spots, even if that means protecting it from you." The door closed behind him with controlled violence, leaving Victoria alone with the bitter understanding that Preston wasn't purely villain or purely victim, just a father who'd failed to protect his child and refused to fail again, even if it meant destroying innocent people in the process. Sophie's interview with CPS took place on a Friday afternoon in a room designed to look cheerful despite its institutional bones. Bright colors, soft furniture, toys scattered strategically to make children feel safe enough to reveal their secrets. Victoria waited outside with lawyers who'd insisted on being present despite Marcus's advice. Through the one-way glass, she watched Eleanor Brennan and a child psychologist settle across from Sophie, who clutched her teddy bear like armor against the world's cruelty. "Sophie, we need to ask you some questions about Mr. Marcus. Is that okay?" The girl nodded, her eyes watchful. "How do you feel when you're with him safe? Like when Daddy hugged me?" The psychologist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, made notes with careful neutrality. "Has Mr. Marcus ever touched you in a way that felt wrong?" Sophie's face scrunched in confusion. "He doesn't touch me unless I ask. Like when I fell and scraped my knee and he put a Band-Aid on." "Tell me about that." "I was running and I tripped. It hurt and I cried. Mr. Marcus asked if I wanted help. I said yes. He got a Band-Aid from Garrett and put it on my knee very carefully so it wouldn't hurt more." Eleanor Brennan leaned forward slightly. "Were you ever alone with Mr. Marcus?" "Garrett was always there. Or Mommy was watching from her office." "How do you know your mommy was watching?" "'Cause she always watches. She thinks I don't notice, but I do." The observation made Victoria's chest tighten. Sophie saw more than anyone gave her credit for. Dr. Chen shifted tactics. "Sophie, can you tell me about the day your daddy died?" The child went very still, her fingers tightening on the bear. Victoria wanted to storm in, stop this, protect her daughter from having to relive that horror. But Marcus was right. Sophie needed to tell her truth, whatever that looked like. We were in the car. Daddy was driving. We were going to get ice cream. The girl's voice went small and distant, retreating into memory. Then there was a big noise. The truck came from the side. Daddy tried to turn, but we couldn't turn fast enough. Everything went sideways and then upside down, and then it stopped. Tears tracked down Sophie's cheeks, but she kept talking, words spilling out like poison that had been festering too long. Daddy wasn't moving. I called him, but he didn't answer. There was red everywhere. On the window, on Daddy, on me. I tried to wake him up, but he wouldn't wake up. Dr. Chen's voice gentled. What happened next? People came. They pulled me out through the window. I was screaming for Daddy, but they wouldn't let me go back. They took me in the ambulance, but Daddy stayed in the car. The psychologist exchanged glances with Eleanor Brennan, some professional assessment passing between them. Sophie, why didn't you tell anyone about this before? Because they wanted to fix it. They wanted me to feel better. But you can't fix it when someone goes away forever. Mr. Marcus knows that. He had someone go away forever too. How do you know that? I can tell. He has sad eyes like mine. But he doesn't try to make the sad go away. He just sits with it until it gets quieter. Victoria pressed her hand against the glass, her reflection ghostly in the afternoon light. Her daughter had been conscious through the entire accident, had watched Thomas die, had carried that trauma alone for 4 months, because no one thought to ask the right questions. They'd all been too busy trying to fix her to understand what she actually needed. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, but the essential truth had emerged. Sophie wasn't manipulated or harmed. She was a child in pain who found someone willing to witness that pain without demanding she perform recovery before she was ready. When it ended, Eleanor Brennan stepped into the hallway where Victoria waited. We'll need a few days to compile our findings and recommendations. But Mrs. Ashford, preliminarily, I see no evidence of inappropriate contact. Your daughter shows classic signs of healthy attachment to a trusted adult, not manipulation or abuse. Victoria's knees went weak with relief she didn't let show. How long until you close the investigation? 2 weeks minimum. We'll interview Mr. Cole's former colleagues, review all documentation, complete our assessment. Meanwhile, he remains restricted from contact with Sophie. That was the blow Victoria had been bracing for. 2 weeks of Sophie asking where Marcus went, why he stopped coming, whether she'd done something wrong. 2 weeks of watching her daughter potentially retreat back into silence because the adults around her kept failing her. The weekend brought protesters. 2 camps formed outside Ashford Enterprises, separated by police barricades and competing megaphones. On one side, concerned citizens demanding Victoria fire. Marcus immediately protect children over political correctness. On the other, activists holding signs declaring, "Stand with Marcus and racism, not justice." Victoria watched from her office window as the crowd swelled their anger and righteousnesses filling the street below. Neither side was entirely wrong or entirely right, which somehow made it worse. The nuance of Marcus's situation, the context that transformed criminal record into self-defense and false accusation into racist harassment, got lost in the noise of people demanding simplicity from complexity. Her phone rang. "Marcus, turn on the news." She switched to the local station where a reporter stood outside the Ashford building, interviewing protesters from both sides. Then the footage cut to Marcus's old school where his former principal gave a statement. "I worked with Marcus Cole for 4 years. He was one of the finest teachers I've ever known. Patient, dedicated, genuinely gifted with reaching difficult children. When that parent made false accusations, we investigated thoroughly. The claims were completely baseless, motivated by prejudice. I wish he'd stayed, but I understood why he couldn't." The scene shifted to Marcus's ex-wife, Keisha Cole, standing in front of her home in Baltimore. "Marcus is the gentlest man I know. We divorced because grief broke us after we lost Daniel, not because of anything he did wrong. If I had a daughter, I'd trust him with her completely." Victoria felt tears burn hot behind her eyes. Marcus's life being dissected on television, his pain and loss displayed for strangers to judge. "I'm sorry." His voice came quiet across the line. "For what? All of it. The investigation, the media, the scrutiny." "Victoria, I've lived with scrutiny my whole life. Every time I walk into a store, someone watches to make sure I don't steal. Every time I'm near children, someone wonders if I'm a threat. This is louder, but it's not new. That doesn't make it right." "No, but it makes it survivable." The call ended, leaving Victoria staring at the protesters below, wondering how many of them had ever actually been silent long enough to see past their own assumptions. By the second week of November, the investigation had consumed everyone it touched. Marcus attended daily interviews answering the same questions in different configurations, while investigators searched for cracks in his story. Victoria navigated board meetings where Preston Hayes pushed harder for her resignation, gathering support among members who valued stability over justice. Sophie regressed, not to complete silence, but to the tentative, fragile speech of those early days. She asked about Marcus, constantly not understanding why he'd abandoned her, unable to grasp that bureaucracy had separated them rather than choice. "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" "No, baby. The grown-ups just need to make sure everything is safe." "But Mr. Marcus is safe. I told them he's safe." "I know you did." "Then why won't they listen?" Victoria had no answer that a 6-year-old could understand, so she just held her daughter and felt the weight of a system designed to protect children, sometimes hurting them instead. Marcus spent his days cleaning floors at Ashford Enterprises under the careful watch of employees who now saw him differently. Some offered quiet support, subtle nods of solidarity. Others gave him wide berth, their suspicion hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. He worked through it with the same patience he'd shown Sophie, understanding that trust once questioned rarely recovered completely, even when vindicated. At night, he attended his grief support group in a church basement in Brooklyn. The group had saved him after Daniel died, giving him space to be broken without judgment. Now it held him together as a different kind of loss threatened to pull him apart. "I thought I could help another kid." His voice emerged rough in the circle of folding chairs and donated coffee. "Thought maybe Daniel's death could mean something if I used what I learned from losing him to help someone else heal. But all I did was make things worse. Sophie's being traumatized by this investigation because I was too stupid to realize that people like me don't get to help people like her without consequences." The group leader, a woman named Ruth who'd lost her husband to cancer, leaned forward. "Marcus, you didn't make things worse. You gave that child her voice back. Whatever happens with the investigation doesn't change that truth. Doesn't matter if they take her away from me anyway. Then you trust that what you gave her was real enough to survive the separation. Seeds don't grow because you watch them. They grow because you planted them." The metaphor settled into Marcus's chest, not quite comfort, but close enough to keep him from drowning. On Thursday of the second week, Eleanor Brennan called Victoria with an update. "We've completed our interviews and reviewed all documentation. I'll be submitting my final report to the Oversight Committee tomorrow. Unofficially, Mrs. Ashford, I found no evidence of inappropriate conduct. Mr. Cole's interactions with your daughter were consistent, properly supervised, and genuinely therapeutic." Victoria's relief came out in a sound somewhere between laugh and sob. "When can he see Sophie again?" "The committee reviews my recommendation next Monday. If they approve, restrictions will be lifted. But Mrs. Ashford, I need to be honest with you. The media attention means this case will face extra scrutiny. Some committee members may hesitate to close it cleanly because of public perception. Politics over facts." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." The weekend dragged past with agonizing slowness. Victoria kept Sophie home, watching as her daughter drew picture after picture of Marcus, each one a small elegy to connections severed by adults who thought they knew better. On Sunday evening, Victoria made a decision that terrified and energized her in equal measure. She called a press conference for Monday afternoon before the committee met, gambling everything on public opinion, shifting fast enough to matter. Her PR team begged her to reconsider. Her lawyers threatened to quit. Preston Hayes sent an email warning that this would be the final straw that forced the board's hand. She scheduled it anyway. Monday arrived, cold and bright, winter settling into the city's bones. Victoria stood before assembled reporters in Ashford's main conference room, cameras rolling, recorders thrust forward like weapons. 3 months ago, my daughter stopped speaking. Trauma from witnessing her father's death stole her voice in ways I couldn't reach. Then a janitor sat with her on a marble floor and waited patiently for her to feel safe enough to try again. His name is Marcus Cole, and he did what 9 expensive specialists couldn't do. He gave my daughter back to me. Reporters scribbled frantically. Victoria continued, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her spine. Now that man is being investigated because someone decided kindness looked suspicious when it came from a black man helping a white child. His record has been leaked, his past dissected, his every action questioned by people who never bothered to ask what actually happened, just what they could make it look like. A reporter called out, "Mrs. Ashford, are you saying race is a factor in this investigation?" "I'm saying that Marcus Cole's record shows a 16-year-old boy who defended his mother from violence. That shows character, not criminality. His record shows a teacher who was falsely accused and completely cleared. That shows injustice survived, not danger posed. The room erupted with questions, voices overlapping in their hunger for controversy. Victoria raised her hand for silence. One more thing. If my daughter's recovery is controversial, then maybe we need to examine why we're more comfortable with children's suffering than with unconventional healing. Marcus Cole asked nothing from me except the space to be kind. The least I can do is fight for him the way he fought for my daughter. She walked out before they could trap her in sound bites, her heart hammering against her ribs. The gamble was made. Either public opinion would shift or she just accelerated her own destruction. By evening, the clip had gone viral. The committee meeting happened in a gray government building that smelled of old coffee and bureaucratic exhaustion. Eleanor Brennan presented her findings to 5 officials, whose faces revealed nothing while they absorbed her recommendation to close the case with no restrictions. After 40 minutes of questioning, they asked Marcus to wait outside while they deliberated. He sat on a bench in the hallway watching lawyers and social workers flow past with case files that represented other lives suspended in administrative purgatory. His phone buzzed. "Victoria, whatever happens, thank you for trying. Not over yet. I know. But Marcus, whether they clear you or not, you changed Sophie's life. You changed mine. That matters more than their decision." The door opened. Eleanor Brennan gestured him back inside. "The committee has reviewed all evidence and testimony. We find no basis for the allegations. The investigation is closed. All restrictions are lifted effective immediately." Marcus felt something unclench in his chest, relief mixing with exhaustion so profound he could barely stand. Outside, Victoria waited by her car despite his instructions to stay away. When she saw his face, understanding bloomed across hers. "They cleared you. They cleared me." She moved toward him, arms rising for an embrace before professionalism stopped her midway. They stood awkwardly in the parking lot, 2 people who'd been through battle together but didn't know how to celebrate victory without crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "Sophie will want to see you tomorrow. Let the dust settle first." Victoria nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "Marcus, what you said about being silent long enough to see someone, I finally understand. I've been so loud, my whole life demanding results and managing outcomes, that I forgot how to just witness. You taught me that. Thank you." The gratitude in her voice carried weight beyond words. Marcus met her gaze, seeing not the CEO who'd once wanted him fired, but the mother who'd learned to fight for what mattered instead of what looked good. "You're welcome. Now go tell your daughter I'll see her tomorrow. She's probably worried sick." Victoria's smile broke like sunrise after a long night, and for the first time since this started, Marcus let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd survive this intact. But storms never truly end. They just pause between waves, gathering strength for whatever comes next. Marcus returned to the Ashford lobby on a Tuesday morning, his custodian uniform replaced by business casual that felt foreign on his frame. Director of Community Engagement, the new badge declared, though he'd insisted on keeping 1 cleaning shift per week. The marble floors still needed someone who understood that honest work held its own dignity, regardless of title. Sophie saw him before he saw her. The girl launched herself across the polished stone with the kind of reckless joy that 6-year-olds specialize in, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Marcus dropped to one knee just in time to catch her embrace, her small arms locking around his neck with surprising strength. "You came back. You came back. I thought maybe you forgot about me." "Never could forget you, Sophie." Victoria appeared from the elevator bank, her expression caught between relief and something more complicated. The investigation had cleared Marcus, but the experience had marked all of them, leaving scars invisible to outsiders, but profound nonetheless. "I have something to show you." Sophie pulled away, digging through her backpack with determined concentration. She produced a drawing, the paper creased from being folded and unfolded repeatedly. Marcus took it carefully, studying the image rendered in crayon and marker. The drawing showed a car twisted and wrong, a figure slumped in the driver's seat, red everywhere, a smaller figure in the back, hands pressed against glass. Words floated above the wreckage in Sophie's careful printing. Marcus's throat tightened as he read them aloud. "Be brave, baby. Tell mommy I love her, and tell her to listen more, talk less. That's how you find the good people." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes flooding. Sophie watched them both with the solemn intensity of children who understood more than adults gave them credit for. "Daddy said that before the ambulance came. I remembered it when the lady asked me questions about the accident. I thought maybe I dreamed it, but it was real. Daddy told me how to find you, Mr. Marcus." The cosmic weight of that statement settled over the lobby like snow. Marcus had never met Thomas Ashford, never knew the man existed beyond Sophie's grief. Yet somehow Thomas's final words had pointed his daughter toward exactly what she needed, toward someone who embodied the very philosophy he'd urged her to seek. Your daddy was a smart man. Sophie nodded, then carefully took the drawing back and placed it in Marcus's hands. You keep it. So you remember that listening is important. I'll remember. Victoria knelt beside them, completing a triangle of people bound by loss and the strange alchemy that transformed pain into connection. Thomas would have liked you. Her voice emerged rough with emotion she'd spent 4 months suppressing. He always said the best people were the ones who didn't need credit for kindness. That real character showed up when no one was watching. Sounds like someone worth knowing. He was. And somehow he knew exactly who Sophie would need when he was gone. I don't understand how, but I'm grateful. The moment stretched, fragile and sacred, before Sophie broke it by pulling out 3 pieces of origami paper. Can we make cranes? I want to make 100, so my wish comes true. What's your wish? Sophie's face turned serious. That everyone learns to listen like you and Daddy, so kids don't have to be so scared all the time. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, the same place where Daniel's loss lived. His son had died trying to save someone, teaching Marcus, through absence, that the best memorial was continuing to care even when caring hurt. Then we better get started. 100 cranes is a lot of work. They settled onto the marble floor, 3 people folding paper into birds, while the city hummed beyond the glass walls. Employees passed by, some staring, most smiling, all of them witnesses to something that transcended corporate hierarchy and social division. By January, the Daniel Cole Foundation existed as more than concept. Victoria had dedicated an entire floor of Ashford Enterprises to the operation, pulling resources from budgets that Preston Hayes initially fought before eventually supporting with the fervor of the converted. The board member's daughter, Carolyn Hayes, agreed to lead the trauma counseling division, transforming her own survival into purpose. Marcus spent his days training community liaisons, teaching them the art of presence over intervention. The first cohort included 5 people whose backgrounds read like cautionary tales until examined with nuance. A formerly incarcerated man who'd served time for drug possession now mentored at-risk youth. A woman who'd survived domestic violence led support groups for families in crisis. A veteran with PTSD coordinated services for homeless populations. Each one carried scars that qualified them in ways credentials never could. The Foundation's mission statement, written by Marcus and refined by Victoria, hung in the lobby. We don't fix people. We witness them. We don't heal trauma. We sit with it until the weight becomes bearable. We don't erase pain. We honor it by refusing to let it spread. Linda Marsh from HR initially questioned whether such philosophy could produce measurable outcomes for board reports and donor presentations. Then the data started arriving. Families served children speaking again after months of silence, parents learning to navigate grief without drowning in it. Numbers that proved what Marcus had always known: sometimes the most radical intervention was simply showing up without agenda. Sophie attended the Foundation's soft launch in early February, cutting a ribbon with oversized scissors while photographers captured the moment. She'd insisted on wearing her best dress, the purple one with silver stars, because this was important, and important things required proper clothing. I want to help too. Can kids work at the Foundation? Victoria exchanged glances with Marcus over her daughter's head. What kind of help did you have in mind? I could teach other kids how to fold cranes, and I could tell them that being scared is okay, that they don't have to talk before they're ready. The suggestion carried such earnest determination that Marcus had to swallow against the tightness in his throat. I think that's exactly the kind of help we need. We'll call it Sophie's listening program. The girl beamed, already planning in the way children did when given responsibility that matched their capabilities. Victoria watched her daughter transform from victim into advocate, grief metabolizing into purpose right before her eyes. That night, Victoria sat in her car in the Ashford parking garage, unable to bring herself to drive home yet. The concrete walls echoed with the distant sound of other engines, other people heading to lives she'd never know. She'd spent the day in meetings about expansion plans and donor cultivation, her calendar packed with the machinery of doing good at scale. But here in the fluorescent half-light of level P3, she allowed herself to simply exist without agenda. Her phone showed 17 unread emails, 3 voicemails from board members, a text from Sophie's teacher about an upcoming parent conference. The demands never stopped, but for once Victoria didn't immediately respond. She thought about Thomas, how he'd built this company while maintaining the capacity for presence she'd somehow lost along the way. He would have loved seeing Sophie cut that ribbon, today would have understood instinctively why empowering his daughter to help others was the truest memorial they could build. Her phone buzzed. Marcus calling from Queens. Just wanted to update you on the Bronx location. Contractors say we'll be ready by March. Good. And Marcus, thank you for everything. You've thanked me enough times. This is partnership now, not gratitude. Partnership. The word felt right in ways that employer-employee never had. They'd become something neither expected equals in a mission that transcended the boundaries that should have kept them apart. By March, national media discovered the story's evolution from scandal to redemption. A producer from a major morning show called Victoria directly pitching a segment about the foundation and the unlikely friendship that spawned it. Marcus resisted initially. I'm not a symbol. I'm just a man doing work that needs doing. But Victoria understood something he didn't quite grasp yet. You're a man doing work that needs doing and a symbol. You don't get to choose which one people see, but you do get to choose what they learn from looking. The morning show interview happened on a Wednesday in mid-March, filmed partly at Ashford Enterprises and partly at the New Bronx Community Center. The host, a woman named Jennifer Walsh with a reputation for asking hard questions, started gently before sharpening her focus. Mr. Cole, you were investigated for inappropriate conduct with Sophie Ashford. How do you respond to people who still question your motives? Marcus met the camera directly. I respond by showing up every day to do work that helps people. I can't control what others assume about my motives. I can only control my actions, and my actions speak for themselves. Mrs. Ashford, critics say you risked your daughter for optics. What do you say to that? Victoria's expression hardened into the steel that made her a formidable CEO. I say that my daughter was dying inside silence, and Marcus Cole gave her a reason to speak again. If protecting that relationship was risky, then the alternative was unconscionable. I'd make the same choice 1,000 times. The interview shifted to Sophie, who sat between them with the unself-conscious confidence of children raised to believe their voices mattered. Sophie, what do you want people to know about Mr. Marcus? That he's good at listening, and that listening is different from hearing. Hearing is when sound goes in your ears. Listening is when you let someone be upset without trying to make them happy too fast. The observation, delivered with 6-year-old clarity, became the soundbite that defined the segment. By evening, it had been shared across social media platforms, spawning think pieces about childhood wisdom and the lost art of bearing witness to pain. Victoria watched the metrics climb the foundation's website, crashing from traffic spikes as donation pledges flooded in. The scandal that nearly destroyed them had transformed into rocket fuel, propelling their mission into national consciousness. But success brought its own complications. The foundation gala in late March drew 500 attendees to a renovated community center in the Bronx, the neighborhood where Thomas Ashford had first funded after-school programs a decade earlier. The symmetry felt intentional, as if the universe was drawing connections between past and present, showing how influence rippled outward in ways the original actors never witnessed. Victoria stood at the podium addressing a crowd that included board members, community leaders, families the foundation had served, and journalists documenting this moment for audiences beyond the room. She'd rehearsed this speech a dozen times, refining it with the precision she brought to quarterly earnings calls. But now, facing 500 faces waiting for her words, she abandoned the script. 10 months ago, I lost my husband in a car accident that left my daughter traumatized into silence. I watched her disappear into grief. I couldn't reach, no matter how much money I spent or how many experts I hired. The room fell completely silent. Then 6 months ago, a janitor sat on a marble floor with a stuffed animal and waited patiently for my daughter to feel safe enough to speak. Marcus Cole didn't fix her. He witnessed her. And in witnessing her pain, without trying to erase it, he taught us both something essential. We don't choose our pain, but we choose what we build from it. Applause rippled through the crowd. Victoria continued, her voice strengthening. This foundation exists because one man refused to let my daughter's silence be permanent, because he understood that healing requires patience more than expertise. Marcus Cole taught me that the people we overlook are often the ones who save us. That real power isn't found in corner offices, but in the willingness to sit with someone suffering until they are ready to stand up again. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat as attention focused on him. He'd never wanted recognition, just the opportunity to honor Daniel's memory by helping others navigate the grief that had nearly destroyed him. When Marcus took the podium, the room fell silent with anticipation. My son drowned 5 years ago trying to save another child. For a long time, I was angry that he'd risked himself, angry that bravery cost him his life. Then I met a little girl who was drowning in different waters, and I realized Daniel had been teaching me all along. We save people not because it's safe, but because it's right. He paused, gathering himself against emotion that threatened to spill over. This foundation is dedicated to Daniel Cole and Thomas Ashford, two people who understood that the legacy we leave isn't measured in what we accumulate, but in who we lift up. They're gone, but their work continues through everyone here tonight. Preston Hayes stood suddenly, his movement drawing attention. The board member had been quietly supportive since his own revelation about his daughter's assault, but this was his first public acknowledgement of the shift. I owe Marcus Cole an apology. I let my own pain make me blind to his character. I saw threat where there was only kindness because I couldn't protect my daughter from a real predator. Marcus, I'm sorry, and I'm honored to work with you now. The applause came genuine and sustained. Marcus nodded acceptance, understanding that Preston's journey mirrored his own in some ways, both of them learning to transform victimhood into advocacy. As the evening progressed, Sophie moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who'd learned early that connection mattered more than protocol. She found Caroline Hayes, Preston's daughter, near the refreshment table. My dad says you help people who got hurt like I did. Caroline knelt to Sophie's eye level, her expression gentle. That's right. Different kind of hurt, but hurt all the same. Does it ever stop hurting? The young woman considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. It gets quieter, and you learn to build around it like how trees grow around scars. The scar becomes part of you, but it doesn't have to be all of you. Sophie absorbed this wisdom, then offered her own. Mr. Marcus says pain is like rain. You can't stop it, but you can learn to dance in it instead of just getting wet. Carolyn's eyes filmed over. Mr. Marcus is a smart man. Later, as the gala wound down, Marcus's phone rang. Keisha, his ex-wife, calling from Baltimore, with a tremor in her voice that immediately put him on alert. Marcus, I need to tell you something about Daniel, something I should have told you years ago. His heart stuttered, dread and curiosity warring in his chest. What is it? The drowning. It wasn't just an accident. The other child who fell in, Daniel pushed him to the edge of the pond first. He saved that boy before the current took him. The words detonated in Marcus's understanding of his son's death. All these years, he'd mourned Daniel's recklessness, his unnecessary bravery. But it hadn't been reckless at all. His son had succeeded in his mission, trading his own life for another's with the kind of calculated heroism that adults spent lifetimes aspiring toward. Why didn't you tell me? Keisha's voice broke. Because I thought it would hurt more. Knowing he saved someone. Knowing he chose to risk himself. But keeping it from you was wrong. You deserve to know your son died exactly as he'd lived, thinking of others first. Marcus found himself in the community center's kitchen, away from the celebration, sitting on a metal stool, while the caterers worked around him. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. Victoria found him there, immediately reading distress in his posture. What happened? He told her everything, the words spilling out between gulps of air that felt insufficient for the magnitude of what he'd just learned. Daniel hadn't been a victim of bad luck or tragic accident. He'd been a hero who understood the cost of his choice and made it anyway. Victoria sat beside him on another stool, not touching, just present in the way he'd taught her. Sometimes silence was the only adequate response to grief too large for comfort. He was 8 years old. Marcus's voice emerged raw. 8 years old, and he understood sacrifice better than most adults ever do. Like father, like son. The phrase landed softly, reframing Marcus's years of work with grieving children, his dedication to the foundation, his willingness to endure investigation and public scrutiny for Sophie's sake. He'd been honoring Daniel all along without realizing it, choosing service over safety in ways that echoed his son's final act. Sophie appeared in the doorway, backlit by the gala's warm light. She approached slowly, reading the mood with preternatural accuracy. Are you sad about Daniel? Marcus wiped his eyes, nodding. Yeah, kiddo, but also proud. I just found out he saved someone before he died. Like a superhero. Exactly like a superhero. Sophie climbed onto the stool between Marcus and Victoria, completing their triangle. I bet he's proud of you too. For saving me. The statement, delivered with childish certainty, broke something loose in Marcus's chest. For the first time since Daniel's death, he allowed himself to believe that his son's legacy lived through his own continued choice to care, that each child he helped carried forward the heroism Daniel embodied in his final moments. April arrived with the kind of tentative warmth that made New Yorkers remember why they endured winter. Marcus stood outside a modest house in Astoria, checking the address on his phone one more time before knocking. The foundation had been open for 6 weeks now, serving families across 3 boroughs. but this would be his first home visit to a success story. The door opened to reveal a woman in her late 30s, exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes. Maria Gonzalez, the intake file had said. Single mother, 9-year-old son, Alex, who'd stopped speaking after witnessing a violent robbery at their bodega 3 months ago. Mr. Cole, thank you for coming. Marcus stepped into a living room that reminded him of his own apartment, tidy despite modest means, filled with the kind of love that money couldn't manufacture. A boy sat on the couch, knees pulled to his chest, watching Marcus, with eyes that held the particular wariness of children who'd seen too much too soon. Hey Alex, I'm Marcus. Your mom says you like to draw. The boy didn't respond, but his gaze flickered to a sketch pad on the coffee table. Marcus sat down on the floor, not on the couch, maintaining distance the way he had with Sophie. I brought something to show you, if you want to see. He pulled out a paper crane one Sophie had folded the previous week. Alex's eyes tracked the movement, interest sparking despite his silence. A friend of mine made this. She's 7. Used to be real quiet like you. Now she teaches other kids how to make them. Marcus set the crane on the coffee table and began folding another from a fresh sheet. Alex watched intently, his shoulders gradually lowering from their defensive hunch. Maria stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to her mouth. Marcus had warned her on the phone not to expect miracles, not to push, just to let whatever happen happen. But he could see the hope fighting against experience in her expression. For 20 minutes, Marcus folded in silence while Alex observed. Then slowly the boy reached for a piece of paper. Marcus slid it across the coffee table without comment, then demonstrated the first fold. Alex copied it, his small hands trembling slightly. Like this. The words emerged rough from disuse, barely audible, but they emerged. Maria's sob filled the room before she could stop it. Alex's head snapped toward her, fear blooming across his face. It's okay, baby. Mommy's just happy. Marcus kept his attention on the crane, giving Alex space to process without pressure. Yeah, like that. You're doing good. They folded together until Alex's crane held its shape, imperfect but whole. The boy held it up to the light streaming through the window, turning it to see how the shadows changed. Can I keep it? It's yours. You made it. Alex set the crane carefully beside Sophie's, studying them together. Then he looked at Marcus directly for the first time. The man who took our money, he had a gun. I thought he was going to shoot Mama. Marcus nodded, not interrupting. I couldn't move. I wanted to help, but I couldn't move. That's okay. Your body was trying to protect you. That's what bodies do when they're scared. But I should have done something. The weight of that guilt was familiar to Marcus, the same burden he'd carried about Daniel's drowning until just weeks ago. Sometimes the bravest thing is surviving. Letting yourself be scared without pretending you're not. Alex considered this, his fingers still on the cranes. Is that what your friend did, the girl who makes these? Yeah. She sat with being scared until it got quieter. Then she started talking again. Will it get quieter for me? I think so. But it's okay if it takes time. Maria joined them on the floor, her hand finding Alex's shoulder. The boy didn't pull away. Mr. Marcus, can you come back? To teach me more. Marcus glanced at Maria, who nodded through tears. I can come back. Or you can come to our center. We've got other kids learning there too. Kids who understand what it's like to be scared. Will they think I'm weird for not talking, though? They'll think you're brave for trying again. After Marcus left, he sat in his car for several minutes before starting the engine. His phone showed a text from Victoria. How did it go? He typed back. He spoke. Just a few words. But it's a start. 3 dots appeared. Then Daniel would be proud. Marcus stared at those words, feeling their truth settle into the place where grief lived. His son's death had been senseless tragedy, but maybe the meaning came after. Maybe meaning was something you built from wreckage, one paper crane at a time. He drove back to the Foundation's Bronx location, where Sophie was leading her first official listening program session with 3 children whose families had sought help. Through the window, he watched her demonstrate crane folding to a girl about her age, their heads bent together in concentration. This was Daniel's legacy, not the drowning, but what came after. The children who learned to speak again because Marcus knew how to sit with silence. The families who found hope because he'd survived hopelessness. The foundation that would outlive all of them, continuing the work long after their names were forgotten. He thought about what he'd told Alex. Sometimes the bravest thing is surviving. Maybe that applied to him too. May brought board meetings that felt more like executions than strategic planning sessions. Victoria sat at the head of the conference table in Ashford's 40th floor boardroom, facing 7 board members, whose expressions ranged from cautious support to thinly veiled hostility. The quarterly reports spread before them showed what she'd already known. Ashford Enterprises was thriving financially, stock up 18% since the foundation launched, media coverage uniformly positive. But numbers weren't why Preston Hayes had called this meeting. Victoria, we need to discuss your role going forward. She met his gaze calmly, already knowing where this was headed. I'm listening. Preston glanced at the other board members before continuing. You've done remarkable work with the foundation, but it's becoming clear that you can't effectively serve as CEO while dedicating increasing time to charitable operations. We think it's time to consider a transition. The air in the room shifted, tension crackling like static electricity. Linda Marsh, the only board member who'd supported Victoria through the scandal, leaned forward. Are you suggesting she step down? Preston's expression remained carefully neutral. I'm suggesting she choose where her priorities lie. The company deserves a full-time CEO. The foundation deserves her full attention. Trying to do both serves neither. Victoria had anticipated this conversation for weeks, had run the scenarios in her mind until she knew every possible outcome. The old Victoria would have fought, would have defended her ability to do both, would have seen this as a challenge to her authority that required crushing. But she wasn't that Victoria anymore. You're right, the statement landed like a bomb. Several board members exchanged glances. I'm sorry, Victoria stood, walking to the windows that overlooked Manhattan 40 floors below. The city stretched endless and indifferent, the same view she'd gazed upon countless times while believing that height equaled power. You're right, Preston. I can't effectively do both, so I'm choosing. She turned back to face them. I'm transitioning to executive chair effective immediately. Michael Chen will assume CEO responsibilities. I'll focus full-time on the foundation. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Linda Marsh smiled quietly. Preston's expression shifted from tactical satisfaction to something that might have been respect. Victoria, are you certain you built this company? I built it with my husband. Now I'm building something else. Something that honors what he believed, that success isn't measured in profit margins, but in lives changed. She gathered her materials, preparing to leave her own boardroom. One more thing. The foundation will remain headquartered in this building, rent-free in perpetuity. That provision will be written into the corporate charter. If anyone objects, I'll be happy to discuss it with shareholders directly. No one objected. Preston stood, extending his hand across the table. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Victoria shook, seeing in his eyes the recognition of someone who understood what sacrifice looked like when you stopped hiding behind corporate speak. So do I. After the meeting, she found Marcus in the foundation's office on the 15th floor, reviewing intake forms for families seeking services. He looked up when she entered, immediately reading the shift in her energy. You told them. I told them. How do you feel? She considered the question honestly. Terrified, relieved, free. That sounds about right. Victoria sat across from him, the desk between them feeling less like hierarchy and more like partnership. I keep thinking about what you said, that not everything can be purchased. I spent my whole career believing I could buy solutions, control outcomes, manage people into being who I needed them to be. And now I'm learning that the most important things, the ones that actually matter, can't be controlled. They have to be witnessed. Marcus smiled, the expression carrying warmth that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with recognition. Thomas would be proud of you. The mention of her late husband no longer carried the sharp edge of grief. It had softened into something bearable, a presence rather than an absence. I hope Sophie will be too. I'm doing this partly for her, showing her that it's okay to choose meaning over money. You're showing her it's okay to choose herself. That's the better lesson. That night, Victoria drove home through rush hour traffic, her phone silenced in her purse instead of mounted on the dashboard fielding calls. The sunset painted Manhattan in shades of amber and rose, the kind of beauty she'd been too busy to notice for years. When she arrived home, Sophie was at the kitchen table doing homework. The girl looked up, sensing something different. Mommy, you're smiling. Am I? Yeah, like really smiling, not work smiling. Victoria sat down beside her daughter, helping with math problems she would have delegated to a tutor 6 months ago. I made a big decision today. I'm not going to be CEO of the company anymore. Sophie's eyes widened. Are you sad? No, baby. I'm not sad. I'm going to work full-time with the foundation now, helping kids like you and Mr. Marcus helped you. The girl processed this information with the seriousness she brought to important matters. That's good. You're better at the foundation stuff anyway. You're learning to listen. The observation, delivered without judgment, landed perfectly. Victoria pulled Sophie into a hug, feeling her daughter's heart beating against her chest, alive and whole, and here. You're pretty smart, you know that, Sophie giggled. I learned from the best. By June, the foundation had expanded beyond anyone's initial projections. 3 more community centers opened across underserved neighborhoods. The listening program, designed by Sophie and refined by child psychologists, served 200 families. Universities studied the model corporate programs adopted. Modified versions and grief counselors nationwide requested training in the methodology Marcus had developed through surviving his own devastation. Victoria now spent her days in the foundation's offices rather than executive suites, wearing jeans more often than power suits, her calendar filled with family visits instead of board meetings. The work was harder than running a corporation, more emotionally demanding, less quantifiable in spreadsheets, but it mattered in ways that quarterly earnings never had. Preston Hayes had left the board entirely to work full-time with Caroline on trauma counseling initiatives. Father and daughter united by pain and purpose, building something meaningful from the wreckage of Caroline's assault. He and Victoria had developed an unlikely friendship built on mutual recognition, both of them learning late that power without compassion was just another word for emptiness. On a Tuesday afternoon in early June, 9 months after Sophie first spoke to Marcus in the Ashford lobby, Victoria brought her daughter to work early. They walked through the building's entrance together, Sophie's backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her voice bright with observations about summer plans and upcoming second grade. Marcus was already there, teaching Darius Webb the proper technique for cleaning marble without damaging the finish. The new custodian listened intently, his formerly incarcerated status no longer defining him, just part of a past he'd survived on the way to becoming someone different. "Morning, ladies?" Marcus's greeting came easy, comfortable in a way that first encounter 9 months ago hadn't allowed for. Sophie ran ahead to examine the lobby's new installation, a sculpture of paper cranes suspended from the ceiling. Each crane represented a child served by the foundation, their wings catching morning light and transforming it into patterns across the marble floor. Hundreds of them, now a flock of hope, made visible. This whole thing started right here. Victoria gestured to the spot where Sophie had first sat with Marcus, where impossible healing began through patience and paper folding. Seems like a lifetime ago. 9 months. Sophie's entire journey from silence to this. She indicated her daughter, who'd cornered Darius and was explaining in exhaustive detail the proper crane folding technique she'd learned from Mr. Marcus. The young man listened with the kind of attention that came from understanding second chances were rare and precious. "You changed everything you know, not just for Sophie, but for me, for the company, for hundreds of families we've helped." Marcus watched Sophie teach Darius, seeing in her confidence the transformation that rippled outward from single moments of connection. "I just swept floors where people weren't looking." You decided to notice. That's the skill, though, isn't it? Noticing. Being present enough to see someone, really see them. The phrase had become foundational to their work, showing up in training materials and donor presentations. But here, in this quiet moment before the building filled with employees, it felt personal again. A truth discovered through shared struggle rather than marketing copy. Sophie finished her impromptu lesson and skipped back to them, her face bright with purpose. "Mr. Darius says he wants to learn origami so he can teach kids at the Bronx Center. I told him that's a really good idea because everyone needs something to do with their hands when feelings get too big." The observation, pure Sophie wisdom, made both adults smile. "You're getting pretty smart, kiddo. I learned from the best." She looked between Marcus and Victoria, her expression serious. "You know what Daddy always said? That the best people teach you things without meaning to, just by being themselves. You two do that." Victoria's throat tightened. Thomas lived in Sophie's memory, his philosophy passed down through observations their daughter was only now old enough to articulate. The morning shift began, arriving employees flowing through the lobby toward elevators and coffee and the work that filled their days. Several stopped to greet Marcus by name, asking about foundation initiatives or sharing stories about family members the programs had helped. The custodian, who'd once been invisible, had become central, not through title or wealth, but through the simple accumulation of care made visible. At 9 o'clock, Victoria headed up to the foundation offices, while Sophie went to the education room where she volunteered twice weekly. Marcus returned to his work, guiding Darius through the rhythms of maintenance that looked simple but required attention to detail most people never developed. Hours later, Victoria stood on the building's rooftop garden, a space she'd insisted on creating, after realizing she needed places to breathe that weren't sealed behind glass. The June sun warmed her face, the breeze carrying the sounds of the city 50 floors below. Her phone buzzed with messages from board members, journalists, foundation partners, all demanding pieces of her attention. She silenced it, choosing instead this moment of stillness. The view from up here showed Manhattan in full complexity, the wealth and poverty existing side by side, the beauty and brutality that defined urban life. But what struck her most was the realization that she no longer needed to control any of it. The city would keep being itself whether she managed it or not. Her work now was smaller, more intimate, one family at a time. One grieving child learning to speak again. One parent discovering they could survive what felt unsurvivable. Below in the lobby, Marcus and Darius finished their shift, both men laughing about something only they could hear. Sophie appeared from the foundation wing running toward Marcus with the day's project, a crane she'd folded from purple paper, her favorite color. The scene looked ordinary, almost boring in its simplicity. A child, a custodian, an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. But Victoria knew better. She'd learned to see the extraordinary hiding in plain sight, the way single moments of kindness rippled outward in patterns too large to fully trace. Her phone rang again. Marcus this time. You should come down here. Sophie made something for you. On my way. She left the rooftop, descending through the building she'd once commanded, now choosing presence over productivity, because some lessons took a lifetime to learn, but changed everything once they did. The elevator descended through 50 floors of steel and ambition, carrying Victoria toward the ground level where her daughter waited with a paper crane and the man who'd taught them both that the quietest voices often spoke the loudest truth. When the doors opened, Sophie's face lit up with joy, so pure it hurt to witness. Victoria crossed the marble floor she'd once viewed only as expensive real estate, kneeling beside her daughter to examine the crane whose wings held all the hope of second chances in unlikely families. The city hummed beyond the glass, indifferent as always. But inside this lobby, three people who'd found each other through grief and cosmic coincidence proved that the world could be different, that kindness could survive scrutiny, that healing happened not through grand gestures, but through showing up day after day, willing to sit with pain until it transformed into something bearable. Marcus folded another crane, his hands steady with practice. Sophie mirrored his movements, still learning but determined. Victoria watched them both, understanding finally what Thomas had meant in those final moments before death stole him away. Listen more, talk less. That's how you find the good people. She'd found them, and in finding them, she'd discovered who she was meant to become all along. Not a CEO who commanded through authority, but a leader who served through presence. Not a mother who protected through control, but one who empowered through trust. Not a woman defined by loss, but one transformed by what she built from the wreckage. The cranes hanging overhead caught the afternoon light, casting shadows that danced across marble floors, where impossible things had become routine. Where a janitor taught a CEO humility. Where a traumatized child became a teacher of wisdom. Where grief didn't end so much as it changed shape, becoming something that could hold hope alongside sorrow. Sophie placed her finished crane in Victoria's palm, the paper warm from her small hands. This one's for you, Mommy, because you learned to listen too. Victoria closed her fingers around it, carefully feeling the precise folds Marcus had taught her daughter, the geometry of patience made tangible. Thank you, baby. Marcus stood stretching muscles that remembered harder work than folding paper. He glanced at the sculpture overhead, counting cranes the way he used to count days, measuring progress in small accumulations that eventually added up to transformation. 243 families now, each one a story of pain, witnessed rather than fixed. Each one proof that Daniel's death, Sophie's trauma, Thomas's final words, all the grief they'd carried had alchemized into something that would outlive them. Sophie tugged at his hand. Mr. Marcus, do you think Daniel can see what we're doing? From wherever he is, Marcus knelt to her level. This child who'd learned to ask questions that mattered. I think if he can, he's probably folding his own cranes up there, showing other kids how to turn paper into birds. That's a nice thought. Yeah, kiddo, it is. Victoria gathered her daughter's backpack, preparing to head home. But she paused, looking back at Marcus. Same time tomorrow. Same time tomorrow. The simplicity of that exchange held everything that had changed and everything that remained constant. They would show up tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. Not because healing was complete, but because it never would be. The work didn't end. It just continued, one day at a time, one crane at a time, one silence held long enough to see someone fully. As they walked toward the exit, Sophie turned back one last time. Bye, lobby. Bye, cranes. See you tomorrow. The cranes swayed gently in the air, conditioning their shadows dancing across marble that had witnessed the beginning of something no one could have predicted. A janitor who became a healer. A CEO who became human. A silent child who became a voice for others, learning to speak. And somewhere in that confluence of pain and purpose, In the space between what was lost and what was built from the losing, three people had found not just each other, but the truth that some gifts arrive wrapped in grief. The best thing you could do was unwrap them carefully, honor what they cost, and share what remained. Outside Manhattan pulsed with its usual chaos, 10 million stories happening simultaneously, most of them invisible to anyone not looking closely enough. But inside the Ashford lobby in the fading June light, silence had learned to speak. And in learning to speak, it had taught everyone who listened that the quietest moments often carried the loudest truth. That patience was a form of power, that presence was a kind of love, that the canvas on which all meaningful connection was painted wasn't noise or control or money or status. It was silence, held long enough to see someone, really see them, and in seeing save them. The way Marcus had saved Sophie, the way Sophie had saved Victoria, the way they'd all saved each other, one paper crane at a time. Paper crane